So as I recently concluded PhD in international development, and during my PhD work, I looked at the role of healers in state building process in post-conflict Mozambique. And today I'm talking about conflict resolution in the spiritual realm in post-conflict Mozambique. So I'll be focusing on the borders Zimbabwe and South Africa, and other African cases and other African countries. But I would like to say that from at least the 3rd century around, Mozambique was populated by Bantu speakers tribes. Then they had the civilization of Great Zimbabwe and Swahili, African Arabs. They developed a sultanate along the northern coast of Mozambique. But in 1498, Vasco da Gama from Portugal, and as a Brazilian, we share the same colonizers. Vasco da Gama arrived as they were traveling around the Cape of Good Hope in 1498, and by the 1880s, the Portuguese controlled trade and they collected tribute, and they imposed very harsh colonial abuses, such as the collection of high taxes and low wages and forced labor. And concerning these colonial abuses, I also like to introduce an actor that is quite important throughout my research, which is the Regulus. And Regulus, they were local chiefs, right? They appeared before the colonization, but they were recognized by the Portuguese. And until nowadays, they have a very important influence in the local politics of the Mozambican communities. So it was a very long colonization, we say almost 500 years of colonization. In the early 60s, FRELIMO, the Frente de Libertação Moçambicana in Portuguese, which is a Marxist-Leninist party and has been ruling the country since the independence of Mozambique. It organized itself and they launched the War for Independence in 1964. Right, this war, it lasted about 10 years, so it was almost a decade of war against the Portuguese, and they declared their independence from Portugal in 1975, after centuries of colonization, as I said, and this decade of war. So the the Mozambique country, it kind of was born in war. It happens to be very followed by war. The independence war was followed by almost 2 decades of conflict between FRELIMO, which has been ruling the country since the independence, and RENAMO, a Resistência Nacional Moçambicana. And RENAMO is very important as the main opposition party, and these two main parties, they've been in tension till nowadays. And the first years of the independence, as I said, they're characterized by the conflict, as the civil war lasted for almost 2 decades, right? And they're combined with failed central planning, disputes with neighboring countries, some neighboring countries were supported RENAMO, and the sadly loss of approximately 1 million Mozambicans, and also millions were internally displaced, right? So the civil war, it destroyed very heavily the social fabric of the country. As young people, they were obliged to kill their own kin. So we have a child being kidnapped by members of FRELIMO and also by RENAMO, and they were obliged to kill members of their own families. So we have a very, very difficult ethnic conflict between people from the same tribes. But in 1992, the civil war ended, right, with the General Peace Agreement. So African countries were following the Cold War and movements for Pan-Africanism. And FRELIMO had a very important backup from socialist countries as a Marxist-Leninist party as well. It's important to mention. And in 1992, FRELIMO opens this political space, right, to these competing parties. So RENAMO becomes a political party, not only a resistance movement. and is also followed by a United Nations operation called UNOMOS. And just let me know if I'm speaking too fast. And throughout the beginning of Frelimo's government, there are moments of recognition and neglect regarding the incorporation of traditional actors. And this is my main focus here, right, into the national system. And I argue that this is very connected to the constant competition between these two main political parties, Renamo and Frelimo, right? As I said, Frelimo establishes a socialist one-party state and many revolutionary reforms. And these revolutionary reforms, they're called the Homem Novo in Portuguese, meaning new man. So they were trying to substitute the racialized divisions of the colonial state to these new men, and they were following an ideal heavily based on scientific socialism, meaning the rejection of superstition and also the rejection of traditional actors and structures. And also Frelimo, they even banished traditional authorities, right, following Article 4 of the first constitution, persecuting these traditional actors. In terms of reconciliation, it is a very controversial theme regarding the Mozambican case. As Frelimo, they promoted a general amnesty for all the veterans of the Civil War. So they were focusing on forgiveness and forgetting as a way to prevent the recurrence of hatred tensions and the recurrence of violent acts. But as I said, this is quite controversial among scholars, as some people vote for the importance of truth-seeking rituals, truth-telling rituals, and some say that this can lead to hatred feelings and conflict. This is a quote that I bring here by Samora Machel. He was the first president of Mozambique, and this portrays a bit of this way they're looking at different traditional actors and different traditional structures, right? He says, to unite all Mozambicans, transcending traditions and different languages requires that the tribe must die in our consciousness so that the nation may be born. So this is it's a very heavy quote showing the position of Frelimo state regarding the traditional actors. And sorry, I also like to highlight that Frelimo, on top of the general amnesty, they rejected the intervention of ICC, the International Criminal Court, and also the creation of a Truth Reconciliation Commission. They portrayed all these institutions as process filled with liberal approaches, not built upon local practice. So this was part of the new man politics. So there is not an official system oriented for justice and reconciliation in the country, as you can see, because of the general amnesty in comparison to most countries, and neither a formal support of traditional structures, right? However, people did not forget, according to the literature, into many interviewees, people looked for healers, for closure and spiritual relief, right? Because healers, the max that I've analyzed into, the possibility of these people to remember and talk about their past, and also they were key actors in providing cleansing rituals. As I said, there is this long moment of the persecution of traditional authorities, but I need to highlight that in the early 90s, there's also a wave of retraditionalization. And in 1992, Frelimo creates the community courts, and I'll be analyzing these community courts today, and also Ametramo, which is the Mozambican Association for Traditional Healers. So as I said, even though there were practice of denial, right, in this Mozambican reconciliation process, healers, they played a fundamental role in the integration of ex-soldiers throughout the country. And beyond this role, they're very important health actors, as there is one doctor to every 35,000 people, but there's one healer to every 8 people in Mozambique. And throughout my PhD research, I argue that beyond health justice and public in Mozambique, in providing physical, spiritual, and psychological healing. So they're very holistic actors, right, who helped the Mozambicans to have some closure all the crimes that were committed during the Civil War. So they provide some closure in a culture of denial. However, I've also identified that field work indicated that healers were not performing those cleansing rituals anymore as they used to do right after the Civil War. And now from jail, so former prisoners, and also people involved in traffic accidents. And this is part of the Mozambican cosmology that I'll be speaking soon, right? The importance of the spiritual realm. In terms of my theoretical framework, I use post-liberal state building, right, to analyze my data and to formulate my main findings. And today I'll be focusing as I said, on the role of healer as traditional justice actors. And this fills a gap left by the formal legal system, which is pretty much absent in most of the country, because Mozambique is very rural. It's like 80% of the country is rural. So people, and also people are very poor, they don't have access to the formal legal systems, which are concentrated in Maputo, the capital of the country. That I like to focus today, it's pretty much analyzing the role of the healers as justice, right? So it goes beyond the common focus in the literature that sees and analyzes the healers as actors providing spiritual healing and cleansing rituals for the reconciliation process of the people involved with the Civil War. Quickly, I'd like to show you the places I went to during my fieldwork. I spent 3 months in Mozambique, and I went to mainly the south of the country, number 6. Maputo is the capital of Mozambique, and Inhambane, number 3, it's also in the south. And I went to the cities of Inhambane, Machixe, and Massinga, and also to the province of Sofala, here, number 9. And the city of Beira in Sofala, I also like to say that it was very complete. It says in the news that it was completely destroyed by a cyclone last year. And all the regions are very poor, but beyond interviewing healers, I also interviewed religious leaders, because they put me in contact with these actors, local leaders, as I said, regulars, these local chiefs, that appeared before the Portuguese colonization, judges, NGOs, members of national institutions, and the main method of collection of data was interviews. So, as I said, I'm focusing on traditional justice, right? So as we look on traditional justice systems in Mozambique, we need to talk about the community courts, right? These courts, they were created in 1992. They were filling a void left by the popular courts that they existed before the independence. So the Frelimo state thought that the popular courts, they were quite connected to this colonial structure. So they created these community courts in 1992 to provide for the everyday conflict resolution in the country. So within these community courts, right, there is a strong focus on reconciliation in terms that they've been providing for the resolution of small controversies of a civil nature, right, following local customs and practices. And it's important to point out that in Mozambique, legal pluralism is seen as a constitutional principle. So there is a strong mix of different legal orders, such as state law, common law, and religious law in the country. And although I'm not focusing on the resolution of wartime justice, I'd like to say that war survivors, they also use these courts to attain justice and some closure. So I argue that healers, they have been very important actors in the community courts, right? They are key actors in these courts, as they are the only actors capable of being a bridge between the spiritual realm and the material realm. And they're the only actors in charge of judging cases of witchcraft. And witchcraft is a very serious issue in the country, and it's generated by envy, for instance. And some people, they cast spells against others when they see people who have the luck to provide to their families or get a new car and so on, so forth. But beyond these witchcraft cases, and in which healers act like investigators, they also provide the proof of the guilty, which is quite impressive in terms that the local actors within the community courts, right, the local judges and regulars, they need to listen to the healer side so they can understand and look for the guilty, the guilt side. For instance, the healers, they've been also resolving everyday conflict, such as card theft, and this was something that was mentioned during my fieldwork experience. So healers, they have a very important role identifying the culprits and providing some closure as well. And these courts, they show that the importance of restorative justice. So it kind of goes against the punitive justice and the retributive justice, right, which is part of the Western models of state building approaches in Mozambique, right? And as they involve truth telling and trauma healing, and also as they involve sometimes the whole community, right? These courts, they emphasize the communal aspects of reconciliation and the plurality of the Mozambican state. As I said, the restorative justice, true reparations, right? And I argue that there's regular emphasis upon individual rights, obligations, accountability, and retributive justice, which quite connected to the new Weberian approaches to state building. They cannot involve and provide for such a communal reconciliation, such a communal society as the plural Mozambique, right? And I also suggest that these community courts, they've been complementing the formal judicial systems, as they have been providing justice, reconciliation, and peace, filling some of the gaps, as I said, left by liberal approaches, and also by the Mozambican culture of forgetting the past, as I mentioned before. And I also like to point out that interviews mentioned that healers, they were very speedy in their interventions. So this was quite important in terms of that this conflicts, they can be very complex, and if they're resolved in a more faster way, they can also provide a better social closure for the whole community in general, right? And also because they speak the local language of the local culture. And here I have a quote by the head of the Secretariat of the Palace of Justice in Maputo, And he said, community courts are legitimate in rural areas because traditional actors know how to use local customs, and even before Ametramo, traditional healers were always heard in those instances. The second one is by an ex-child soldier, and he was the CEO of Fomicris. Fomicris is a quite important institution in Mozambique, as they were responsible of collecting almost 1 million small hand weapons in the country, and they also worked for bringing ex-child soldiers back to their community. And he says, state justice is not present throughout the country, but community courts are the greatest justice in Mozambique. This is a picture of a local traditional healer. He was also a judge within the community courts in Inhambane, in the south of the country. And this is another quote by Fome Criscio. He said, in Mozambique, there is a type of conflict that needs only the intervention of traditional doctors. Our country has a lot of witchcraft. There is much talk about this, right? There are many robberies that sometimes we do not have a criminal identification policy to identify who is stealing. And traditional doctors have intervened. They know how to gather, seek to find out what happened, who killed, and people secularly until today believe it. Even if it is maybe a little empirical method, but they are the ones that make the social carpet stand and people believe. That's why I say that they will play a great importance for social stability, understanding between people, and even harmony. Here, I just want to show you how the community courts are formed by these three main local actors. Sorry, regulars and judges could be seen as local actors, right? Because they are recognized by their own communities, and by Ametramo, which is the Mozambican Association for Traditional Healers. As I said, was created in 1992, following that wave of retraditionalization of the country. And Ametramo was created by the Ministry of Health, and they've been registering healers throughout the country. And this is very important because, as I said, there is witchcraft as a big issue. In concerning witchcraft, healers can be seen as sorcerers, right? As the bad witch, like bad witch doctors, when they are not recognized by the state. So Ametramo, as an arm of the state, they've been registering the healers, they provide ID, and they've been also training healers in knowledge in different types of disease as very serious disease, such as malaria and HIV, in the sense that they teach healers to recognize these diseases as diseases that cannot be treated by the performance of their own rituals, right? They need to go to the hospitals, and vice versa, which is quite interesting. I heard that hospitals, they also lead the patients to healers if they identify some problems connected to the spiritual realm, right? If it's a spiritual problem, if it's something related to a spirit of a diseased relative who is looking for closure, they conduct the patients to the healers. And here's just to highlight again the main roles of the healers within these traditional justice systems, as they've been acting as investigators, pretty much as detectives, looking for those who perpetrated crimes or those who stole an object, and so on. They're final judges, and I'd like to highlight again that this is quite important in the sense that the only actors in charge of knowing who is connected to witchcraft, in terms of they are the only ones who can connect to the spiritual realm as the mediums that they are, right? So they're mediums, they're providing closure in terms of spiritual distress, they connect to the ancestors of those who have died, of the ancestors of the people who are alive, and those ancestors have died, and sometimes they have died in the previous years, and sometimes they have open issues that connects the healers in those structures. In terms of techniques, they use divination, they provide counseling, and goes also psychological relief, right? They also act as local psychologists, and they have different types of rituals to provide for this everyday conflict resolution, and they can also be very communally based. This is a picture of a healer also from the south of Mozambique, in Machixe, and she was also a leader of AERMO, and AERMO is the Mozambican Association for Herbalists, right? And she was quite important in her community, as she was in charge of arranging local meetings, and this goes out of the instances of the community courts. So it shows the role of the healers beyond this. It's not, it can be said that it's formal because it was created by the state, but it's quite organic, the community courts, because they've been functioning without much regulation by the state, right? And also because local actors such as local judges, as I said, and people from Ametramo, they can call this court to judge the different types of cases. But she also works out of this community courts realm, right? As she provides for everyday conflict resolution in her community, gathering people to analyze local cases. And she's back here in the left side of the picture, right? She was in charge of gathering all these of these people to solve a dispute between two families, right? And all these women in here sitting on the floor, they're all healers. And in the back, we can see the place where the one in the left, she used to perform her healing rituals. This is another very important female healer that I'd like to bring here in Orange. And these are the headquarters of Ametramo, right? And all of these people were healers, but the one in Orange, she was in charge of also arranging the meetings. Like, and these meetings happen two times a month at this place. And they would listen to the people's problem. And if they couldn't solve a case here at Ametramo's headquarters, they would ask for the community courts to be operating the cases, to be judging the cases. And when the cases are not resolved within the community courts, they go up higher in the justice instance. So my main findings that I'd like to bring here to conclude, it's that I argued that the recognition of healers by Regulus, the local chiefs, by Ametramo, which represents the state, and the people, the main beneficiaries of these systems of conflict resolution, this recognition confirms the role of the healers as justice actors. However, there is partial recognition of traditional justice systems by the state. As I said, the community courts, they've been functioning very organically without much regulation by the state. I've also identified some language barriers in the sense that the criminal code, the law codes, they're all written in Portuguese. And although Portuguese is the formal language, some healers, and most of the healers I interviewed, they could not use language as their main language, so they couldn't even read some parts of the code. So there's a lack of legislation structure in regarding the influence of the state. And also many healers said there was this very problematic issue with stigma. They were stigmatized by the Mozambican society. As I said, this is part of the historical perception of seeing the healers as traditional authorities and connected to Frelimo's Newman politics, that they couldn't be seen as main actors dealing with the social structures of the country. And also because witchcraft can be connected to the healers and the casting of bad spells. And in this sense, healers, they've been revealing mixed perceptions, as although they're keen to be recognized by Ametramo, and they were keen to be close to Ametromo, working with Ametromo as health actors. Many healers, they complained that Ametromo was focusing on their role as health actors, and they said that they were very holistic actors as they connected the spiritual realm to the justice, to the material realm, and in these terms, justice was part of their actions, right? And they're also political actors providing protection to many politicians during the electoral process, but the state was still focusing on their roles as health actors. So I analyzed this as part of a post-liberal state building, right, in Mozambique, as I focus on the importance of the local agency of these actors. And I also criticized the romanticized hybridity. I didn't say, but I use hybrid political orders as my theoretical framework of analysis throughout my thesis, but I criticized the framework of hybridity that kind of romanticizes these local actors, because these healers, they're connected to chiefdom systems, right, and to patriarchal politics. I didn't mention before, but as you've seen, many of healers I interviewed were female, right, and female healers were quite important as local chiefs in their communities, but they were not invited to be part of the community courts, and this was an issue that came up during my research, right? And this kind of legitimates a very patriarchal society, as there is widow rituals that kind of connect the healers to very patriarchal schemes, and also witchcraft that can be associated with the healers. Sorry. I'd like to bring one more quote by a traditional healer in Mashishi, in Abani, and he said, "The use of the term traditional medicine practitioner by Ametromo and the focus on medicine restricts our work." So that's it. I think my time is gone. I couldn't follow much because of this problem with the screen, but I hope I can answer the questions that you have. If you don't have questions, you can contact me through my social media or via email. Thank you. Thank you again, Amina, for inviting me to be part of this digital talks today.
Thank you very much for giving us a talk. It was very interesting. And I wonder if anyone has any questions. If you do have a question, you can just unmute yourself and ask away. If
I was sorry,
Simon.
No, it has been interesting. Thank you. I was wondering. I mean, what is the what is the relation between the traditional justice system and this, in specific, especially concerning to criminal justice? First of all, I'm surprised to hear that criminal justice is delegated also to this court, because while in other cases of litigation, of course, you can have a mediation, an alternative solution, but if you are accused by a healer, how do you defend yourself? I don't know how you can do it. So that is one question. And the second is, if it is possible for somebody to say, okay, I don't want this to be treated by the community court, I want to go to the court, or if the court, regular courts, traditional, non-traditional, but formal courts, once there was a community court, they say, no, this thing has been decided, we don't want to enter. Thank you. So that was two questions. I don't know if it was clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So shall I start answering? Or?
Yes, please.
I can collect my. In terms of how do people defend themselves within the community court, right? It's pretty much, it's a process of, it's very connected to talking. Sometimes people need just like an oral treatment, right? In terms of finding forgiveness. This is something that came up during field work, right? And sometimes the people who are charged and they were considered guilty, they need to provide some reparations, and they can be right, cleaning the farm of someone, and they also need to pay some fines as well. And the defendant part of this process is collected, is kind of guided by a lawyer. There is a lawyer in the community courts, but I'm not sure if you mean like if someone is saying that, oh, the healer, he casted one spell on me, and how would I defend myself for this specific type of accusation? I don't know, because it's something that I haven't faced during my fieldwork experience, but I believe that the defendants would have their own lawyers to go through this during the trials. And as I said, if people that do not solve their crimes within the community courts, they go up the higher instance. So the formal courts, they're called by the local judges. For me, it was a bit hard to identify this, because it was hard to find local judges, right? As I said, healers, they were recognized as local judges because they were very important in the sense that they could transit between the spiritual realm and the material realm. So they were the only ones in charge of judging witchcraft cases. But I couldn't interview many local judges to get this perception of what happens if they cannot defend themselves, and what happens if the cases need to go to the higher instances. But from the literature and the documents that I've read by the government, written by the main national institutions connected to justice, the cases, they go to higher instances, and people then go to Maputo to solve the crimes. But the community courts, they've been very important in solving the crimes that happen in the communities, right? It's like 80% of the crimes they've been solved by the community courts themselves. They don't need to go to the Maputo, to the capital, according to the interviews. This is not an official data, right? But it was mentioned by some interviewees. And I'm not sure if I was able to respond to the question, because for me, this part of the defendants, the litigants, was a bit tricky to identify throughout my research. But thank you.
There is also a question from Lou.
There we go. Hi, Sam. Great presentation. Hi. As always. There was something that you said that really caught my attention. At some point in your presentation, you presented a quote saying that healers were giving closure in a culture of denial. And that last part kind of really stuck to me. So I want you to tell me a little bit about that element of, denial of the past, of denial of what happened. And if you think that all these processes of the spiritual realm, of healing in this traditional form, serve some way to countering denial in Mozambique.
Yes, thank you, Luis, for a question, and you would be interested about that. But as I said, there was the gender amnesty, but the second part of the reconciliation process was based on traditional structures. Although they were banished by the state, the whole process of accountability, forgiving, it was part of these traditional structures, right? And you can read one great researcher, she's also from Brazil, Natalia Bueno, and she published specifically on this, right? The clashes between a culture of denial, but also a culture that used this authorities, these actors, informally to provide foreclosure, and this is pretty much the most important literature on, as I said, on the role of the healers. It's very connected to their role as reconciliation actors, right? And there are many articles and books that are focused on the rituals that the healers performed right after the Civil War to provide disclosure. And this is very connected to the ancestors, right? Or the people, not ancestors because it was very quick, right? The process of reconciliation happened right after the Civil War. But the people who died in the war, they would appear again, like they would come back in the dreams of the people who survived, right? For example, a woman that lost her husband during the war, she would dream about the husband being killed, and she wouldn't stop having this dream. So this is the point where these people, they go for the healers for closure, because healers were the ones who provided this type of closure, and this is kind of embedded in the Mozambican cosmology. There are many cases about that, in sense of people going for the healers because they had these dreams connected to their past, and there are cases that people find where the bones of those who died were buried and things like that through the ritus conducted by the healers. And I didn't mention, but remember the quote that you mentioned by this ex-child soldier. He said the healers were very important, very like extremely important to his life, because when the Civil War ended and he had to return to his community, he needed to go through a cleansing ritual. Otherwise, he couldn't get married, for instance, right? And he was quite, and this was quite common, as he said, that they also worked reconnecting people to their communities as a national institution. He faced this as an individual looking for closure and looking for the cleaning of the wounds of the war and the wounds of the past, right? This is very part of the literature and part of the Mozambican history. Although, as I said, I pretty much focus in the role of the healers as justice actors in post-conflict Mozambique, not as reconciliation actors in terms of thinking about forgiveness and closure as your interest.
Thank you for that answer. Are there any other questions? We've probably got time for maybe one more question. I think, if not, Amina mentioned she might have a question.
Once more, thank you, Samara. It was very interesting to listen to your presentation. My question is, so when you showed us which parts of Mozambique you have visited, so it's mostly south of Mozambique. So I'm interested to hear, is there a specific reason why you chose these regions? And also, like when you visited them, what was their reaction to you as a foreigner visiting?
At first, by the beginning of my fieldwork, I was interested in going on at least two main regions, the south and the center. But unfortunately, I couldn't spend more than 1 week in the region that I went to, in the center, so Fala, right? So I spent most of my time in the south because I didn't have connections with the healers, so it was a problem of logistics, right? So I had to spend some time in the capital to organize myself and get in contact with NGOs so I could reach the healers, and also because I decided to, after I had contact with the healers, I decided to spend more time in the south because the social fabric was very destroyed in a sense here in the south, right? And I was very curious to know the role of the healers as actors who provided justice beyond reconciliation in the south of the country. But in terms of explaining why I went to Sofala in the center, I also was curious about identifying if there was different connections of the healers with justice, right? Because the center, in terms of politics, it is more connected to Renamo, right? There are many people electing Renamo in the community, more than the south. The south was very based by Frelimo followers. And I was curious about understanding the interactions between healers and politics, and they're in Renamo, which is the main opposition party. So that's why I went to the central part of Mozambique, and to see the difference in terms of culture, because each region has many different tribes and languages and so on. I didn't mention, but the north was populated by Swahili people, so there's the predominance of Islam in the north of the country, but I didn't analyze these influences in my research. So it was a bit of understanding the political dynamics, right, of these two different areas, and also logistics. It took me a while to get in contact with the healers, most by the support of NGOs. In terms of the reactions as a foreigner, I think I'm very glad I am a Brazilian, and this helped me to connect with the Mozambicans in general and with the healers as well. They're very open to the Brazilian culture because they've been watching Brazilian soap operas. Many people also mentioned Lula because Lula he opened our international relations focusing heavily on Africa and the South, right, and connecting Brazil to Africa. And I didn't have many troubles as being a foreigner connecting to these people, but there were some issues in terms of I was representing University of Birmingham, in a sense I was a researcher trying to collect data. So this was a bit confusing in terms of representing a Western institution, but being Brazilian and not being representing any NGOs, right? Because I got in contact with the healers mainly by the help of local NGOs, but I was interviewing the healers by myself, so I wasn't representing those NGOs. And they were a bit of, I was a bit aware of being seen as a Westerner, although I'm Latina, but still, and also as someone that could help providing something as a settlement to very poor regions and in very poor headquarters of Ametromo. So some healers also approached me in terms of, can you help me building this? Can you help me building that? Can you help me bringing more money to this specific institutions and so on? So I was always trying to remember I'm only a researcher, I'm not representing NGO. And it was also a very internal finding, like about looking for myself as a researcher and trying to understand my own perceptions as a Brazilian who also had the imposition of Portuguese colonization, but which was also very different from the Mozambique independence war, as we didn't have a war per se, I would say.